The days are longer, the calendar is filling up, and I want to feel as good as this beautiful summer weather. That's why I've been loving Groons. It's one daily pack of gummies that covers my greens, vitamins, and minerals, and even has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber. So I don't need to juggle a complicated wellness routine on top of everything else. They taste amazing. They're easy to toss in my bag on the go. Plus, they're vegan, gluten free, and HSA, FSA eligible for reimbursement. Save up to 52% off with promo code podcast at gruns.co. That's code podcast at gruns.co.
Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 178, recording on Tuesday, June 23rd, the quietest time of the NFL calendar. I don't believe there will be any notifications over the course of this episode, which is greatly appreciated, and it allows us to dig a little bit deeper on some of the subjects you are curious about, I am curious about, and that's what we're going to do over the next month or so, leading into what is going to be a fascinating, interesting, and exciting training camp 2026. If you're new here, first and foremost, I'm Alec Lewis. I cover the Vikings for The Athletic on a daily basis. We do this show 2 times a week. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or iHeart, you can rate, review, all of that good stuff. Check out the stories at The Athletic. And we want to shout out real quick. We'll get to them a little later in the show. First Resource Bank, our presenting sponsor, and ProMN Athletics, a local group lifting the tide of football here in Minnesota. And Unreal, the clothing brand that I'm washing I've worn it every single day, so I'm washing it right now. Let's get right to you guys' questions. So I took these on social media at Alec_Lewis. If you're not following us over there or on our show's accounts at Alec Lewis Show, usually put the call out for questions every Monday or Tuesday, so you can look forward to that and hop right in. First question comes from The Purple Persuasion. Asks, regarding edge rusher, would you put a higher percentage on an older free agent vet or a trade for a younger vet, future pairing with Dallas Turner? I would say for me, answering this question, it's not even close, and it is the older free agent vet. And you guys might be asking why that would be. Well, I'd start with the Vikings essentially have their 2 starters for 2026 at edge rusher. It's abundantly clear, with Andrew Van Ginkel on one side and Dallas Turner on the other. I think, in the best case scenario for this team, Andrew Van Ginkel continues to be the cyborg that he has been, and Dallas Turner, continues to progress the way it looked like he was progressing down the back half of the 2025 season. So allocating meaningful draft capital to acquire someone who is then potentially going to cost at a position where the Vikings have essentially just cut costs to go younger. I don't see that as the most sensible path. A couple of other layers to think about within this conversation. So, and the edge rusher is a very important one, just to be very clear, because the depth behind Dallas Turner and behind Andrew Van Ginkel, it's pretty thin. I mean, I've written this, I've said it on the podcast. You guys are probably tired of hearing about it at this point, but if Andrew Van Ginkel were to miss 5 games like he did in 2025, who is the player who's going to be replacing him? Is it undrafted, former undrafted players like Bo Richter or Chaz Chambliss? If not, is it Jake Golday, who has worked exclusively thus far, essentially as an off-ball linebacker? Like, you start to wade into conversations that aren't the most comfortable. And then I'd say if you lose Dallas, perhaps if Andrew Van Ginkel suffers an injury, then you slide Dallas Turner over to his spot. And this is where I want to make it abundantly clear to you guys, like, the Vikings defensive system the edge rusher spot is really two different positions. There is the more pass rush traditional edge rusher, which is what Jonathan Grenard was and what Dallas Turner has shown to be. That's kind of his best spot. And then there's the more Flores-y type edge rusher where it's can drop into coverage, can kind of extend down the line of scrimmage, can also rush the passer, is has the mental aptitude and intelligence to be able to kind of orchestrate calls at the line of scrimmage. So there's really two different spots. If Andrew Van Ginkel were to suffer an injury in 2026, you probably slide Dallas Turner, who knows that position better than others on the roster and can play it probably better than others on the roster. You slide him over to that spot, and then you replace Dallas Turner with a more traditional pass rush type of player, which also lends itself to the veteran free agent signing, who is more likely to fit that specific skill set. I would say the Vikings have 13.1 million approximately in cap space to spend, so that lends itself as well to some short-term spending on this spot at some point before the 2026 season. And then, I would say the real question mark for me and why I think a couple reasons why the Vikings have yet to fill this spot is how can you find someone who has been experienced and who has been productive, who is willing to play kind of a depth role at least to begin until somebody gets hurt. And like, if you're thinking about the guys whose names I've seen thrown out there, your Hassan Reddicks or your Joey Bosa's or your, I don't know, your Leonard Floyd's, your Jadeveon Clowney's, like these guys, perhaps they want to be surefire starters for a team. And so they'll wait until training camp. Somebody who is an edge rusher on another team gets hurt, and that team needs a starting edge rusher, and that player can sign a deal and step right in as a starting caliber player. Whereas the Vikings, in the best case scenario, Dallas Turner's really coming on throughout training camp. Andrew Van Ginkel is doing his thing throughout training camp. And so all the Vikings really need is a depth type option. And so who can you find to fill that type of role? And that's not, to save money per se, but it's more to allow Dallas Turner to continue to ascend and to provide Andrew Van Ginkel with the every down opportunity that he very much deserves. And so that really, to the initial question, for me, and why I see this as something that will continue to play out over the next couple months, is just an evaluation of who's available, who is going to be willing to sign for a certain type of money and specific role that the Vikings are looking for, and then whoever threads that needle optimally, I think probably makes the most sense in the end. And I mean, we've talked about Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, the second-year player who's going to kind of transition a little bit. I've seen a lot of people in the comment sections of YouTube videos and even stories say things like, Caleb Banks can play all over the defensive line of scrimmage defensively. And yes, when he is healthy, he absolutely can. But to ask him to be your, X amount of snaps edge rusher, that's just not the most optimal spot for him, even if he has the athleticism and the skill set to play somewhat of that role. So that's kind of how I'd answer that one, and why my brain immediately goes toward the veteran free agent edge rusher edition being the most likely route and the one that, in my mind, makes the most sense for sure. All right, next question comes from MG Walleye. Do Blake Brandel and Will Fries limit the ceiling of wide zone? I thought this was a really interesting question. It allows me to talk a little bit about the intricacies of the wide zone and what the Vikings are planning for 2026. So I guess first to answer the question, I don't think so. I don't think Blake Brandel or Will Fries' presence would limit the ceiling of what the Vikings can do with the wide zone at all. I think, in many ways, so much of what the wide zone as a run concept is about is like, it's almost like the sum is better than, the individual parts, where you're hoping that the team construct of how the offensive linemen and obviously tight ends attached to the line of scrimmage and wide receivers who are like Jawan Jennings, who can fill in the run game. Like you're hoping that group collectively can fire off the ball and be very quick with their initial steps to kind of in tandem and as a group provide space and run lanes for really fast, really explosive backs with great vision to then feast on it. So I think, if anything, the Vikings are almost preventing Blake Brandel / Will Fries from having to individually seal off, specific blocks that put them in disadvantaged positions that require more of than might be possible. I did look this up. So, like, for you guys who are wondering, like, what is the wide zone? You're talking about the wide zone. Be more specific. So I would just say, think about a handoff from under center where the running back is angled toward the right leg of the tackle or the tight end position on the end of the line of scrimmage. And then the entire offensive line flows toward that direction with the running back flowing toward that direction. And if the defenders stay inside, the running back can hit it around the edge. If the defenders overflow toward the edge, the running back can then cut back and hit it inside. And so it requires a precise level of path from the running back. It also requires adjustments to be made on the fly of coaches on the sideline with the Microsoft Surface tablet scrolling through images going, okay, this linebacker's overflowing, so let's cut this back quicker. So it takes it's very much an entire team construct play where even the position coaches on the staff had to be very attentive to kind of the ongoings of the play. What would be the byproduct, you guys might be wondering, of the Vikings practicing this play more, of focusing more on firing off the ball throughout the spring and throughout training camp? So I pulled up a couple of these numbers, and I thought they were very interesting. So the Vikings ran, of their run concepts in 2025, 25% of them were outside zone concepts. These numbers are courtesy of FTN. That was like the 11th most outside zone run percentage of any team in the NFL. So it's not like the Vikings are starting to run a concept that they've never run before. On those runs, the Vikings averaged 4.3 yards a carry. That was 19th in the NFL. The year before, in 2024, the Vikings ran the outside zone probably 26% of the time, which was 9th in the NFL, and averaged 3.8 yards per carry, which was 24th best in the NFL. So, like, I would expect both of these numbers to increase. The percentage of usage of outside zone, probably closer to 28% or more. And then the yards per carry, you would hope, could eclipse 4.5 or more. And if you improve those numbers, I think specifically the yards per carry number, it becomes potentially significant in removing the burden on the quarterback to have to make every single play. And it provides even more potential explosiveness in an era where, especially against the Vikings, these defenses love to have two high safeties deep to cap every vertical route and keep everything underneath and make the offense go 8 plays, 10 plays, 12 play drives. Whereas if there's more space underneath for the running backs to then hit you for a 25-yard play, as opposed to being the vertical explosive passing game all the time, you can start to mix in some of these big vertical hits on the ground that help balance out just what you can do offensively. And so in the best case scenario, that's what this allows you to do. And having Blake Brandel and Will Fries being a part of it, I don't think is an inhibitor in any way to that kind of coming to fruition. The next question comes from Nick Howard, who is always appreciated as a listener and as a question asker. What is your favorite part of training camp to cover? Man, this is a great question. It's one that goes a lot of different ways. I'd say first and foremost, just being back around everybody is one of the awesome parts of it. I would say, and that's everybody from the players to the coaching staff to the personnel staff to even the PR staff to the media members who I work with every day. I mean, you spend so much time with some of these people and establish a certain rapport where it could be an early part of practice on a Tuesday in training camp and you're scorching underneath the sun and making certain jokes that we've called back on now for 3 years of being around. So I love just fundamentally that part of like just the environment and being around people and having those, side conversations and jokes and being able to ask questions. I'd say that's the other thing for me is training camp is an awesome learning time where you get to, I get to query coaches, staff, personnel, staff, players, just certain aspects of the game that I get to learn about that I feel fortunate to be in the position to get to learn about. And then hopefully for you guys, that allows me to funnel in a little, technicality of the game that hopefully allows you to watch it maybe in a little bit of a different way. So that part of it I absolutely love as well. I'd say on the on-field component, the 7-on-7, 11-on-11 team stuff is always the best. I mean, you've got, I don't think people realize, but in training camp, like not everything is so scripted to where Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores get to compete a little bit out there. And as much as it's a preparation process, there's also a push and pull of trying to push each unit to the maximum. And you're having, I mean, for me, that's two of the best at their craft, two of the top at their craft, getting to go back and forth and getting to watch some of the probably unheralded parts of camp and sometimes like layered portions that don't really ever see the media space, like getting to watch that in person. I feel fortunate and grateful to get to do. So, and then the joint practices. I mean, for me, getting to see Lamar, getting to see that Ravens defense with Jesse Minter, and then how the Vikings match up. I mean, the competitive portions of that are always freaking incredible. So, a lot of parts of it that I absolutely love. It does go in phases where you're pumped for the beginning, and then 2 weeks in, you're ready for preseason, and then you need joint practices, and then you're ready for the season to get here. But given the excitement that will surround the many storylines for this team, I'm can't wait, even though I'd probably need to spend the next month relaxing more than I am to prepare for the very, very difficult task of sitting behind a computer and writing about football. But great question, Nick. I appreciate that one. Before we get to the next question, I want to talk about three of my favorites. The first is our presenting sponsor, First Resource Bank. They are a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area, run by phenomenal people, Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, and Charlie Anderson. These guys are from the area. They care deeply about the community, and they have built a bank that is really connected with the community in terms of people, in terms of businesses, and in terms of brands. And they are huge Vikings fans. They go to every game. They've got many, many tickets to every game and branches all over the city with people stocked within those branches who will talk to you about your team the way you probably want to, you want to be connected to people who care and want to go intensely on the iterations of what the Vikings can be. So First Resource Bank, I've used them since I moved up here, and their online banking platform has made it so easy for me to transition. So their information is in the description. You could sign up for an account, and I highly recommend it. Show's also sponsored by Pro MN Athletics. So three guys, Kurt, Graham, and Tanner, they came together and they're like, how can we lift the tide and really raise the tide of youth football development here in Minnesota? And they've done that with 7-on-7 leagues. They have a summer 7-on-7 league for 5th through 9th graders. And they're also working privately with a ton of football prospects in the area. I mean, there's some quarterbacks. So Tanner Morgan, former Golden Gophers quarterback, is working with some 2028 kids. Graham Gresseth, Bo Schwartz, 2029, Jake Kaiser from Chanhassen, Gus Olson from Farmington, and it's everything from under center to how to play out of the gun to play with play action to resetting in the pocket. And so I would just say, if your kids want to play football at the high school level, at the college level, if you've got friends who have kids who want to play at an elite level, I cannot recommend Pro Am enough for the way they've, you really targeted development here for kids in the state and want to see the best for Minnesota youth football. And their information is in the description below. And then Unreal, the clothing brand, which I'm rocking on a daily basis, based here in Minnesota, St. Paul. They've got unlimited edition hoodie wraps, or limited edition, hoodie drops in the fall around the Vikings schedule, and then they've got collabs all over the place popping up throughout the Twin Cities, and it's about as elite of apparel as you're going to find. So cannot thank Unreal enough for their support. All right, we're going to do one more quick sponsor, Great Clips. So life comes with a lot of things to remember, and Great Clips doesn't think your haircut should be one of them. That's why they use clip notes to save your haircut details, so no matter which stylist you see or which Great Clip salon you visit, it's easy to feel like the best version of you. So do yourself a favor, say goodbye to guesswork and hello to a great haircut every time. Download the app today, Great Clips. It's going to be great as well. Let's get right back to the questions and hop back in with Fernando at Viking fan _1964, latest on Harrison Smith. So we've talked about Harrison Smith a fairly good amount here on the show in terms of where he's at, in terms of his return to play or lack thereof. I'm going to give you kind of the skinny here real quick. So Harrison Smith, 37 years old, turned 37 in February, and just completed a career where down the back stretch, he looked like the Harrison Smith that everybody's kind of become accustomed to. You guys probably even more than me, haven't watched him longer than I have. But really, the fact that Brian Flores stayed around as the defensive coordinator was a huge marker to him being interested in returning. And now it's just kind of a waiting game. And I don't expect an answer next week. I don't expect an answer even in July. Like, I think this thing could play out into training camp and potentially even the early part of the season for Harrison Smith to evaluate where his body is, where his mind is in terms of how much he really wants to give this thing another go. And I think, if throughout training camp the Vikings are proving and establishing that they have a real shot at taking this thing deep into the 2026 postseason, that'll only further probably sway Harrison Smith one way or another. So, I just don't expect any short-term resolution for Harrison Smith, and I think he's earned that over the course of his career. Having him back immediately doesn't really accomplish much, given he has an awareness of the defensive system that is above and beyond really anybody else not named Brian Flores within the Vikings organization. Next question comes from JJ McDarnold at Skoll or whatever. Can you talk a little bit about what Damon Claiborne is doing physically to prepare for the NFL, bulking up, etc.? I would say, to answer this question for Damon Claiborne, it's really more mentally, like the runway for him to prove his worth and to get on the field in the short term is more. It's more like about the playbook and pass protection and just consistency in the work habits every single day than it is showing anything or improving anything physically. Like, could he put on some more muscle mass? Absolutely. But for me, it's managing those first three buckets effectively will go much further than anything he could show physically. Because physically, you guys will know this. When you show up to training camp, one of the things I'd recommend you do is one day just pick number 21. That's Damon Claiborne, and just watch him. Watch him move across the field. Watch him field kick returns. Watch him as he's weaving in and out in kind of half-speed handoff type drills, and you will understand that the way this guy moves is pretty special and pretty different. And so as long as he has a very finite understanding of what the playbook is asking of him, of understanding the verbiage and just some of the complexities that this offense asks of all positions, but that one as well. The more likely he is going to, the higher the likelihood he's going to have to contribute early on with this team. And I would say the fact that Aaron Jones is in that running back room who can help him and bring him kind of a board every single day is such a massive thing. And I have to think having a player and a person of Aaron Jones' caliber helps probably drive the Vikings to being comfortable enough to make the decision to have a guy like Damon Claiborne a part of their team and in this phase of learning the offense into the 2026 season. All right, the next question comes from Purple Nurple. In the same way Frank Smith is bringing fresh ideas to the run game, are Ryan Nielsen and Gerald Alexander bringing some fresh ideas to the D-line and DB rooms? What could that look like? This is a very interesting question. And I would say, so Ryan Nielsen is the new defensive line coach, spent a lot of time in New Orleans, then was the DC in Atlanta, then was the DC in Jacksonville, then spent last year with Buffalo as kind of an advisor. Gerald Alexander was he was actually a DB's coach at Cal. Then he transitioned, was with Brian Flores in Miami, then was up in Pittsburgh. I would say of those two, the one who is most likely to probably, bring some new techniques or some new potential kind of, schematics to the Vikings defense would be Ryan Nielsen, just because I think Gerald Alexander, Brian Flores see such eye to eye to already to what they do, whereas Ryan Nielsen is more of, bring some more external thought, but he'll have kind of a knowledge of probably some of the matchy coverages that the Vikings haven't run a lot, and you guys might be like, what is that? Where I would describe that as the Vikings have played a lot of zone coverage where it's just dropping to spots in the league. There are certain coaches who coach defense where you're kind of dropping to a spot, but you're also picking up receivers who enter your area and almost covering them like man once they enter your area. So potentially mixing in some more of those coverages would be one avenue. But then also just on the defensive line, specific stunts, specific just probably front mechanics on how to operate against the run. Those could be elements and layers to what Ryan Nielsen brings. I also just think, and it's the same way with Keith. Someone asked me, I think it was a Twitter user, Danny Carlson, asked me, who represents the play style that Kevin O'Connell always talks about and wants to continue to improve. It's really like who represents the physicality shift of the Vikings team in 2026. And the three obvious answers that come to my mind or came to my mind when I received this question was Keith Carter on the offensive line, certainly, Juwan Jennings as a just gritty receiver, and then Ryan Nielsen, who just thinks going to have a huge hand in the development of Caleb Banks and Dominique Orange. So whether or not Ryan Nielsen infuses the Vikings defense with new schematics on the front, his ability to reach those players and maximize and really just allow them to ascend to what they can ultimately be, like that, it is just such a critical aspect of where this team can go in the short term and long term. So don't think you can overstate that. At Ryan Fitz 711, how do you handle being around Will Reichard's aura when he walks in the room? I'm just grateful, Ryan. I mean, when Will Reichard walks in the room, you see that haircut from Great Clips, and I mean, he doesn't miss. So yeah, I mean, you're fortunate in this job to be around greatness sometimes, and you don't take it for granted. And that would be one example of what that can look like. Let's see here. Next question. Robert Mays. This comes from Robert Ocean. Robert Mays had a fascinating conversation with Bengals OC Dan Pitcher, exploring the work he does as an OC without play calling duties. Do you have a sense how the division of game plan responsibilities currently works, and whether that will be different now that Frank Smith is here? So yeah, I mean, I'd say generally to break it down a little bit for you, certain coaches on the staff do a lot of work on certain areas of the game plan, whether it's red zone, whether it's early downs, whether it's late downs, whether it's pass game, whether it's run game. And then typically in recent years, it's kind of been my understanding that Chris Cooper and Wes Phillips, a lot of those guys drove a lot of the run design, and then they kind of married it up with the pass game. And I would expect Frank Smith in some ways to work with that group and then have an understanding of what Kevin O'Connell wants to do in the pass game and kind of work as a like real-time bridge for both kind of the pass and run game to maybe help streamline things throughout the process in a more maybe a more seamless way. And because of his work with Mike McDaniel being kind of a liaison and a right-hand guy and almost kind of a facilitator with the pass game, I just think it's a really good bridge and marriage in many ways. And then because Keith Carter was one time an assistant O-line coach in Atlanta with the Shanahan system, like he and Frank Smith will have been able to and will continue to be able to speak the same language and what they want to do with the wide zone and the run game in general. So just think there's going to be probably more of a just direct funnel of information, more real-time funnel of information, and then a more synergistic, to use a very clear buzzword, kind of flow of pairing what the Vikings want to do in the pass game and the run game on a weekly basis, which I think will be helpful. We'll have to see it in real time. It's a lot of, thought and vision and talk at this point, but if it does play out, if the Vikings offense does succeed at a high level, I do think it's going to be one of the components of it. Let's see what else we got. Someone asks, who plays the most snaps at quarterback this year if you were a betting man in June? I think any odds, whether you went to any sports book or whatever, I imagine they would have Kyler Murray at the top of that odds board, and I just wouldn't probably bet against that. But I do think there's a very probably realistic world where Kyler plays, and if there's injury, I just think, to rule out certain guys not playing in 2026 would go against every conventional understanding of injury history in the past and what it could look like. And I'm just going to say, because it just feels important to me, I'm taking a very step back, global view. Once training camp begins, I'm going to view it as objectively as possible of how these guys perform and what people say behind the scenes, and just make the evaluation from there. And I'm not just going to go in with any preconceived idea of what I think or expect to happen. Just going to watch it every single day and be very open, wide-eyed to what I see, and allow that to inform the decision-making process. So, yeah, that's what I'd say on that. I just think it's important. Been thinking about it a little bit and what my approach is going to be, and that will very much be the case. So that'll probably do it for our early week episode of the Alec Lewis Show. We're going to have some guests later in the week. Looking forward to that. Some different conversations coming in the next few weeks. And then, before we know it, we're about a month out from getting ready to talk about training camp and position battles and all that good stuff, which will be a joy to do here on the Alec Lewis Show and The Athletic. Appreciate you guys watching on YouTube. Appreciate you listening on Apple or Spotify or iHeart. Thanks to First Resource Bank for their presenting sponsorship. Thanks to ProMN and Unreal for their support. That'll do it. Episode 178. Enjoy the middle part of your week, and we will talk to you very, very soon.